Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really going to unpack four big words: intellect, materialism, religion, and spirituality. We use them all the time, but the way we group them, well, the assumptions can be pretty simplistic.
They really can. The common idea is often quite stark.
Exactly. Like you hear highly educated, you think intellectual, probably materialist, all logic, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe religious folks or spiritual seekers, they're seen as less materialistic, perhaps less logical.
That's the stereotype, and it's just not accurate when you look closer. Our sources really push back against that kind of binary thinking.
Yeah, how so?
Well, you quickly find that not all intellectuals are purely materialist, not by a long shot. And, maybe more importantly, just being part of a religion doesn't automatically mean someone is on a genuine spiritual path.
Okay, so that's our goal today. We're looking at sources that argue the labels aren't the point. We need precise definitions first, and then we need to understand what's really driving these different approaches. The hidden engine, so to speak. Motivation.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating because how we misunderstand or misuse these terms, how we lump them together, it actually shapes our view of reality. And crucially, it can impact our own, inner journey, our spiritual development. So maybe we should start with those definitions, get the building blocks clear.
Good idea. Let's unpack them one by one based on the source material. Where do we start?
Let's begin with the intellect. The sources define it as basically the part of our mind we use for thinking, for reasoning. It processes abstract ideas, things that go beyond just what our five senses tell us.
Okay, so it's like the mind's processor. Sources give an example, like seeing a beautiful landscape.
Right. Your eyes see it, that's the senses. But your intellect is what processes the awe, the emotion, maybe turns it into knowledge or inspires you to learn about, say, geology or ecology. It connects the feeling to understanding.
And it's not always about survival or getting stuff?
No, not necessarily. The intellectual drive can be pure curiosity, just wanting to know, wanting to figure things out. Research, theory, that's the intellect at work, often without a direct material goal.
Makes sense. Okay, what about being spiritual? How is that defined? It's not about joining something.
No, fundamentally it starts inside. It begins with this deep inner feeling, a sensing that there's some kind of bigger picture, a master plan, a grand design to life and the universe.
Like an intuition.
Sort of, yes. And that feeling, that intuition becomes the spark, the drive for a search for meaning that goes beyond just the physical stuff we can see and touch. And because it's beyond the physical senses, you have to use your inner self, call it spirit, soul, psyche, whatever term works for you.
And the goal of this search?
Connection. It's about trying to connect to that beyond, gain some understanding of the principles running the show, and then, crucially, trying to live your life in line with those principles.
Okay, so spiritual is the inner search. How does religion fit in there? It also talks about advancing the inner self, right?
Yep.
Toward the other world.
It shares that objective, yes. Advancing the inner core towards a non-physical existence. But the how is very different from the individual spiritual path.
Different how?
Structure, and often limitation. Religion usually comes with a set package. Specific beliefs, prescribed actions, what we often call dogma. These are laid down by leaders based on interpretations of what a founder taught. They become the fixed articles of faith.
So it's more of a defined system.
Exactly. And interestingly, the sources note these systems often put a huge emphasis on achieving bliss in an afterlife. Which is fine, but sometimes it means less focus on personal growth, on figuring things out for yourself right here and now.
I see the distinction. The spiritual path is the active personal search. Religion is the established framework. Okay, last one. Materialism. This one seems tricky. The sources say there are two sides to it.
Yes, and confusing them is where a lot of the initial assumptions go wrong. First, there's philosophical materialism. That's the worldview, the philosophy that says everything, absolutely everything, is just physical matter and energy. Reality is only material stuff and its interactions. Nothing beyond that exists.
Okay, a purely physical universe. And the second type.
That's attitudinal materialism. This is the one we probably see more often day to day. It's that strong desire, that drive to get stuff, money, possessions, status symbols, and often this drive takes priority over, say, intellectual pursuits or spiritual values.
Philosophical is the worldview, attitudinal is the behavior, the drive to acquire. Okay, so now that we have these clearer definitions, this is where those initial groupings we talked about start to fall apart, doesn't it?
Immediately. Take attitudinal materialism, that desire for things, for status, for projecting an image. It's everywhere.
You mean it's not just an intellectual trait?
Not at all. The sources are clear. It cuts across all the lines. Educated, uneducated, religious people, spiritual seekers, you find that drive to accumulate, that focus on external validation to some degree in everyone. It seems to be a very basic human tendency.
Wow, okay. Thinking of attitudinal materialism as universal,
Mhm.
that really does shift things. But what about the other kind? Philosophical materialism, the idea that reality is only physical. Is that still holding strong?
Well, that's where things get really interesting today. That core idea is actually being challenged, even from within science and intellectual circles.
How so?
We're seeing discoveries in fields like quantum physics and even biopsychology that are really pushing the boundaries. They're making us rethink fundamental ideas about space, time, even consciousness itself. The line between mind and matter isn't looking quite so solid anymore.
You mean things like quantum spirituality. I've heard that term. People trying to link quantum mechanics to spiritual ideas.
Exactly. Some thinkers are drawing parallels. Take the observer effect in quantum physics.
That's the idea that just watching a particle changes it.
Yes, and some interpret that to mean awareness itself can influence the physical world. It's used as a kind of conceptual echo of the spiritual idea that focused consciousness can shape reality.
Interesting. And what about quantum entanglement?
That's another big one. You have these two particles, linked, separated by vast distances, yet they instantly mirror each other's state. Some see this as a scientific reflection of ideas like spiritual oneness or interconnectedness, a possible model for how perhaps consciousness or souls might be linked across the universe.
So whether those parallels are literal truth or just analogies.
The key point is that the intellect is involved in exploring all of it. It's the intellect building religious doctrine. It's the intellect grappling with quantum physics. And yes, it's the intellect figuring out how to meet our basic material needs.
Right. So the simple equation intellectual equals materialist just doesn't work. The materialist label really fits the attitude of acquisition best, and that attitude is found everywhere.
Precisely.
Okay, so if we step back and look at the bigger picture, does focusing too much on just one of these paths, even the intellectual one, limit us somehow?
According to the sources, yes. Each path, if followed exclusively or without broader awareness, can limit your perspective and your goals.
How does materialism limit things? That seems obvious, maybe.
As a total worldview, philosophical materialism is seen as the most limiting. It basically says this physical life is all there is. So your thoughts, your goals, everything gets confined to what you can achieve or measure right here on Earth.
Okay. But what about religion? It's aiming for something beyond Earth, the other world. How does that limit awareness?
It's often the structure, the dogma. If you adhere to the beliefs without question, without personal striving for understanding, the sources suggest it can prevent that deep personal realization that's central to the spiritual path. Think about rituals. If they're just done by rote, without connecting to their deeper symbolic meaning, it might feel like spiritual progress, but it could just be habit. No real inner transformation happening.
Okay. Habit versus transformation. And pure intellectualism, using logic, reason. How can that be limiting if it leads to discoveries?
The potential limitation there is if the intellect operates only within the material framework. If it excludes or dismisses the inner core, the spirit, as irrelevant or non-existent, then it's limiting perception to only one aspect of reality, ignoring the inner dimension.
But wait, here's a twist. You said earlier that true spirituality actually needs the intellect.
Yes, that's the paradox. Genuine spiritual progress, according to these sources, absolutely requires using your mind. You need deductive thinking, reasoning skills. Why? To connect the dots, to see how the things you observe in the everyday physical world actually reflect deeper underlying spiritual laws or principles. You have to intellectually recognize those laws in action around you. That recognition is what builds personal conviction and real understanding.
So the intellect isn't the enemy of spirituality. It's a necessary tool for it. Spirituality is the only path that demands you use that tool to look beyond the immediate physical world. Let's quickly map out how the intellect functions in each area then.
Okay. In materialism, both philosophical and attitudinal, the intellect is pretty much king. It's the main tool, driven largely by the physical brain, responding to desires, survival instincts, planning for acquisition.
Right, and in religion.
Oh, the intellect is incredibly active there. It builds the complex theologies, the detailed dogma, the intricate rituals, and as the sources point out, the intellect is constantly working to adapt religious teachings to keep them relevant as society changes. Sometimes this means rituals lose their original meaning and become more like superstitions, but the intellect is driving that adaptation.
You mean like priests or shamans redesigning things over time?
Exactly. History shows leaders constantly tweaking the framework to fit the culture. It proves the intellect is always working to maintain the system, regardless of whether deep spiritual understanding is happening for the followers.
Okay. And in science, or pure philosophy?
Intellect is obviously central, but even there, the sources argue that the conclusions a thinker reaches are always colored by their underlying assumptions about life, about reality. Their worldview shapes their intellectual output.
Which leads us where? If the intellect is this powerful tool used everywhere, from writing scripture to designing iPhones, it can't be the bad guy itself, can it?
It can't be, it's just the instrument.
So what's the real difference maker? What determines whether the intellect is used constructively or not?
It comes down to that unseen engine we mentioned earlier, motivation.
Ah, okay. The why behind the thinking.
Precisely. The quality, the purity, the nature of your motivation, that's what shapes the output of your mind, of your intellect. The sources give a great comparison here, looking at two well-known philosophical materialists.
Like Stephen Hawking.
Yes, he didn't believe in an afterlife, identified as a materialist in that philosophical sense. But his motivation seemed rooted in this profound curiosity and care about the universe, about humanity. Remember his quote, something like, "We have this one life to appreciate the grand design of the universe." His intellect was driven towards understanding that grand design.
Okay, and who's the contrast?
Herbert Spencer. He's the one who coined survival of the fittest, which became a cornerstone of social Darwinism. That idea basically supported the notion that the powerful, the wealthy, the fittest are naturally meant to dominate. The sources pose the question, what was his motivation? Was it pure understanding, or did it perhaps serve to justify a certain social order, a need to conquer? The motivation drastically changes the impact of the intellectual work.
That's a powerful contrast. And this idea of motivation works within groups, too, not just between them.
Absolutely. It explains the different directions people take, even within the same religion or on the same spiritual path.
How so in religion?
Think about it. Within one religion, you might have someone whose motivation is pure compassion, wanting to serve humanity, the saintly impulse. And you might have someone else whose main motivation is performing all the rituals perfectly to guarantee their personal spot in heavenly idol bliss, as the sources put it. Same religion, totally different inner drive, different output.
And on a spiritual path.
Similar divisions. Is the motivation to gain knowledge in order to control unseen forces, maybe gain personal power or predict a future? Or is the motivation a simpler, pure desire for genuine insight into how the universe works to align with those principles? The underlying impulse directs the entire quest.
So the takeaway is, every single action, whether we label it intellectual, material, religious, or spiritual, it's all fueled by some kind of underlying motivation, conscious or not.
Yes. Which brings it right back to us, to you listening. The sources suggest the most critical first step for anyone on any path is to become consciously aware and honest about your own motivation.
That sounds simple, but it's probably the hardest part, isn't it? Really looking at why we do things, asking tough questions like, am I donating to this charity or doing this volunteer work partly because I want people to see me as a good person? Or maybe even just to convince myself I am. Is my involvement in any group, humanitarian, religious, spiritual, partly about projecting a certain image or gaining some kind of status? That level of honesty, that's where real growth starts.
It really is. So if we try to pull all these threads together, the brain, the intellect, it's the essential tool. But what it produces, a theory, a building, a prayer, a choice, it's always shaped by your inner drive, your motivation, whether you're aware of it or not.
And that perspective helps clarify that old warning you sometimes hear about intellectual activity, doesn't it? People sometimes think it means don't think too much.
Right, but that's a misunderstanding, or at least an incomplete version. The full warning isn't don't use your intellect. It's more like don't rely only on the products of your own thinking. Don't let your intellect, operating alone, be the sole judge of truth and the only guide for your actions.
So what should guide it then?
The advice is to consciously seek input, seek connection, seek enlightenment from, well, the sources use terms like higher realms. Essentially, it means looking for guidance beyond our immediate, often self-seething or survival-based thoughts, trying to connect with those fundamental universal principles or laws that underpin existence. It's about striving for that purity of motivation we discussed, because that's what keeps the powerful tool of the intellect aimed towards something constructive, something good.
That leads perfectly into the final quote we wanted to share. It's from Abdrushin in the Grail Message, and it really hammers home this point about conscious motivation and its consequences.
Yes, it's quite direct. You are free to decide, but you are then irrevocably subject to the consequences of your thoughts, of your volition. You yourselves create these consequences, and that is why I exhort you. Keep the hearth of your thoughts pure, you will sow peace and earn happiness.
Keep the hearth of your thoughts pure. That phrase, consequences of your volition, your will, your inner drive, that really sums up this whole deep dive, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The final thought for everyone listening is this. Whatever your focus is, material success, intellectual discovery, religious devotion, or spiritual seeking, that very first most crucial step is becoming aware of your inner motivation. And then consciously making the effort to keep that motivation aligned with something higher, something pure. If you can do that, the sources suggest, then your thoughts, guided by your intellect, are far more likely to sow peace and happiness for yourself and others. Now that's something to mull over.